Well, hello all. Welcome to Regulated Habits Meetup Group. This is a recording this week, and this is week 11. I'm Mike Thomas, and we're going to be going over the idea of interval training and the window of tolerance in terms of stress. So the highest amount of stress that you can tolerate and the lowest amount of stress that you can manage to sink into to find deep relaxation. So the wonderful thing about interval training is it leaves you a direct experience with how hard you can exert yourself and actively working on calming the nervous system, the heart rate, the breathing, making sure that you're as recovered as possible so that you can exert yourself again as hard as you can. And what this is doing is it's widening your window of tolerance in a very real way that you can feel. So this meetup group, this series of topics all revolve around the idea of being more regulated in terms of your nervous system, which is all about working on lowering stress load, but also increasing the capacity through which you can stress your system and not be overwhelmed. So in interval training, think of it in terms of an all-out sprint, or perhaps battle ropes, right? As you can see in the handout here. So you can see this woman, she's holding onto two ropes and she's squatting down and she's vigorously moving them as hard as she can. So that would be probably for about 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, rarely pushing to 90 seconds for all-out exertion is not as likely. You want to exert yourself hard enough that it's closer to 30 seconds that you can manage at the most. Okay, and this is really challenging your intensity. How much can you exert yourself without overwhelming your system? And so keeping your maximum heart rate in mind, the basic formula for that, it's called the Carbonin formula. Take the number 220 and subtract your age. So if someone is 20 years old, their maximum heart rate would be 200 beats per minute. So if you're wearing one of those heart rate monitor wristwatches or a chest band, that monitors it and sends the heart rate to your watch, maybe you're wearing an Apple Watch, whatever it is that measures your heart rate, you want to have some idea of what your maximum heart rate is so that you don't push that hard, because you're not going to be able to recover very easily for most people. There are some people who train that way, train maximal exertion, for example, Olympic sprinters, and they're going to be able to handle pushing their maximum heart rate up way higher than the average person. But whoever you are, you want to see how high you can push your heart rate while also being able to recover. So this is something you need to play with a little bit. I would say the average person probably pushes up to 75, maybe 80, 85% at the most. So if you're 20 years old, the maximum heart rate would be 200 beats per minute. Each increment of 20 beats is 10%. So down to 90% would be 180 beats. 160 beats down at 80%. So it drops pretty quickly in percentage there. So if you are middle-aged, that's going to be significantly less of a maximum heart rate. And so how high your maximum heart rate might be closer, if you're in your 60s, that maximum heart rate is going to be, let's see, 220 minus 60, that's 140 at, 100 and so 20. Let me just do this math real quick in my head. This is not my strength, doing math in my head. 220 minus 20 and another 40. So 160 would be the maximum heart rate if you are 60 years old, because we're subtracting 60 from 220. All right. So if that's your maximum heart rate, you're at 100%, right? You're probably not going to want to exert yourself past about 80, 85% at the most. So we're talking, 130, 135 at the most to maximize your heart rate. So that's your exertion, right? Is the highest amount of stress that your body can tolerate and still be able to recover. And you want to play with this and notice, is it 130? Is it actually more like 120? Like 70, 75, 80%. I can't do those percentages in my head, but you get the idea. You want to figure out what it is, figure it out on the calculator and figure out what's your maximum, and no more than about 80, 85% at the max. Check your heart rate. That will determine how hard you work in your intervals, and also how quickly are you recovering? Is your recovery rate sufficient that you can begin to do another high exertion rate, another difficult set of, let's say, battle ropes or jumping as high as you can or sprinting? Can you do that within a minute or two? Okay, about a minute or two of recovery is plenty of rest in, let's say, one particular type of interval training is called high intensity interval training. That is a fairly high level of exertion, but you're continuously shifting to the next muscle group and the next muscle group and the next muscle group. So you're working your legs with vertical jumps as hard as you can. Okay. While you're resting your legs, you're now jumping right into, without much of a rest, maybe no rest, into another body part completely. Like, let's say, working the chest and arms with push-ups. That's not directly working the legs, although the legs are involved because they have to stay tense in order to maintain your leg position while you're doing your push-ups. So in a sense, they're just going to a lower level of exertion while you're working on another part. And then you go, let's say, to your core and you're doing, let's say, crunches or sit-ups. You're working your abdominals, or you're doing Superman, where you're belly down on the ground and you're lifting up your arms and your legs, extending your back. That's yet another muscle group you could be working while you're resting your legs, while you're resting your chest, while you're resting your abdominals, and you cycle through all of these different exercises. So what's happening on a nervous system level is you're challenging the stressor of exercise, how much you can exert yourself in all of these different body parts while other parts are recovering. And while the other parts are recovering, you're doing your best to get enough oxygen back into your system with your breathing so that you can recover those muscle groups that were just exerted in those past sets. So, for example, you take vertical jumps or squats for your legs, right? And you're working as hard as you can to about 70, 75, 80, 85% of your max heart rate. And you're making sure that you're not going too high, because even though you're switching muscle groups, you're still exerting on a cardiovascular level. You're still exerting your heart, even though we're switching to another muscle group. So in any sort of interval training, you're probably not going to push to 85%. Some people might, if they're at a very highly conditioned state where, for example, an Olympic athlete, they'll be able to handle keeping their heart rate up at higher levels for a longer period of time. But what you want to be concerned with, as I assume the average person, maybe you're athletic, maybe you're sedentary, maybe you're just getting started with a workout program, wherever you are in the process, you want to be aware of your breath. Okay, so this brings up the idea of window of stress tolerance. I was gonna show you the piece of paper, but I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up on screen so you can see it more clearly. Okay, so this is from the NICABM, stands for the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. That's a fancy schmancy way of saying psychological tools to support clinical practices of supporting, for example, treating someone who has anxiety disorder or depression disorder or ADHD or bipolar or something like that. So we're not doing that here, but we're using this tool because it's a really helpful way to understand the way we manage stress at the highest level of stress that we can tolerate. When we get beyond that point where we can manage it, our breathing is going to shift. Our sensations are going to shift in a way that's perhaps very uncomfortable. So a hyperventilating state, because a heart rate's too high for too long, leads to going beyond our window of tolerance into what you can see there is hyperarousal. you're too high in your stress response and your heart rate has gotten too high, your breathing is going to reflect that. Discomfort in your body is going to be reflected as well. Now, although I do appreciate this particular graphic for showing, okay, so that's hyperarousal when you go beyond your window of tolerance, exerting yourself too much. Hypoarousal actually doesn't occur down at a deep level of relaxation. That actually occurs above hyperarousal. So this isn't super accurate in terms of where the stress response results in these different symptoms. When you go into hypoarousal, that's actually beyond overwhelm, where you're to the point where your heart rate, your blood pressure, and your awareness actually drops down and you don't have awareness anymore. You actually go into freeze, which is a high level of tension in the body, or even further in that level of stress elevation is a complete collapse where you would pass out, right? That's from such a high level of stress that you go into what's called hypoarousal. And some people go there very easily based on past experiences that are triggered and lead them into a shutdown right away because the stress goes right through the roof. The body perceives on an unconscious level that we need to shut down. Okay, so how does all of this correspond to the experience of doing interval training? Well, I want to share a little bit of what I've written out on this handout. You can reach out to me by email, holisticfitnesslifestyle@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to send you any of these handouts. So the title of this particular week's theme is interval training, finding growth in the balance between struggle, high stress levels, and rest, low stress levels, ideally. So all-out effort and relaxation are two sides of a spectrum of effort. A very low level of effort is going to be more toward relaxation, and a very high level of effort is going to be at a level of all-out exertion, potentially pushing toward overwhelm. Deep relaxation is necessary for rejuvenation and recovery after intense effort. And the wider the spectrum, that is, the greater the window of tolerance, the more capacity you have to navigate stress as it comes up, to recover from it, so on and so forth. Oh, that's a great decaf black coffee. Okay, so work on how intensely you can challenge yourself, such as increasing the weight. So if you're doing, jumping in place just with your body weight, that's one level of exertion. Whereas if you're holding a 10-pound weight or putting on a weight vest that weighs 10, 15, 20 pounds and doing those same jumps, it's going to be an increased intensity. It's challenging the level of stress you can tolerate in that interval training exercise. So increasing the weight, the exertion, how high you're jumping, right? Highest you can possibly jump is the maximal exertion, whereas just doing a little hop would be less exertion, right? So you can pace yourself based on what you're capable of, what your breathing, your heart rate are telling you, and so on. You can also change the total amount of sets and repetitions that you do. So instead of just doing a 30-second interval of jumping, you could do 45 seconds. You could do a minute long, exerting yourself as hard as you possibly can. That's increasing the volume, the total amount of jumps that you do, or how many times you go through that cycle of jumps, push-ups, crunches, Supermans, like I mentioned in that example earlier. Those are all different body parts. And how many times do you complete a set of each of those? Maybe it's one cycle, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles. That's going to take a while, and it's going to be a lot more volume, which increases the overall work that you do, the overall amount of stress that you can tolerate. Okay, so the total volume of work, increasing your sets, your time of exertion, and your total repetitions, reducing the amount of rest that you have between, keeping your heart rate higher because you're not recovering as fully. These are all ways of challenging yourself to experience more stress. And you want to notice what your body is telling you as you're engaging in these types of workouts. You're trying to figure out, okay, so if I exert myself as hard as I possibly can, and I'm up at 85% of my max heart rate, well, chances are, even if I shift to another muscle group, my heart rate is not going to come down because now I'm exerting myself with another body part. Yeah, the first body part's resting, but chances are with continuous sets where you shift from one set to the next, to the next, to the next, different parts, one part's resting, the other part's working, you still need to worry about how high your heart rate is, right? So you're probably not going to push more than 70, 75% of your max. You want to keep it relatively lower in intensity so that you can do all of the work that you have planned. And there are different benefits for having moderate levels of stress and challenge in your exercise versus high levels with actual rest between your sets. And you want to check in with your heart rate and your breath to see, as well as what you're sensing in your body. Oh, you can feel like, oh, I'm about to throw up. That you've probably exerted yourself for way too long and for too intense of sets without resting properly. Not only will that over challenge your heart and your lungs and your muscles to the point where you're not going to be able to recover as effectively as you need to do your next set or to make sure you don't overwhelm your nervous system. Well, you're also going to experience overwhelm on a neurological level. That's something we want to pace. We want to make sure that you're only exerting to the level that works for you as an individual. Okay, so recovery time between sets varies depending on your goals, with longer rest periods of 3 to 5 minutes between sets. That's a lot of rest, but that fully restores all of the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate. That's triphosphate. That is a energy molecule that the body uses to exert energy. You want to make sure to replenish that completely if you're doing sets with the goal of increasing strength. Because if you don't recover fully, you're not going to be able to challenge yourself as intensely, right? And so you're not going to maximally challenge your muscles, therefore they will not get as strong. So interval training is not designed to be strength oriented. That's why the rest periods are shorter. It's challenging your cardiovascular endurance and your overall exertion level. How much stress can you tolerate for how long with minimal rests? So having the minimal rests is more akin to interval training, aka circuit training, where you're switching from one to the next, to the next, to the next, different muscle groups, and keeping your cardiovascular challenge up high, your heart rate and your breath rate, right? And so as you're doing this, you want to pay attention to your breathing and overall effort to make sure that you don't work past your overall discomfort. Okay, so let's wrap up this concept here by talking about how this experience of exerting yourself as much as you possibly can with your physical exercise as a stressor, how does that correspond to this idea of your window of tolerance? How you can exert yourself and how much can you relax? Well, improving your window of tolerance in your physical exercise directly parallels your experience of your nervous system window of tolerance. So let's use a non-exercise example so you can get a clear idea. So if you're particularly sensitive to social stimulation, and maybe you are so sensitive you have social anxiety. That is, when you engage with people socially, you feel your heart rate elevating. You feel your breath rate start to get shallow and more rapid. Okay, these are signs of hyperarousal, and perhaps you're in a crowd of, a large crowd of many people. If they're not focusing on you, maybe that's a little easier to tolerate. But let's say you're on stage with a large crowd of people. That's a completely different level of exertion on a nervous system level. You're not exerting yourself physically, but yet your heart rate and your breath rate are going up, and you're feeling that social anxiety, that experience of, I don't like this experience. It's too much stimulation. It's not physical stress, but it is a psychological stress that comes from that experience if you do not have a very high level of tolerance for social stress. Maybe your social tolerance for social stress, your tolerance is down here. And so therefore, if you're completely at rest, you would say, as far as social tolerance by yourself, and you have a low tolerance, well, as soon as you go into the presence of another person, you might start tripping over your words. Oh, I don't know if I said that the right way, and you might start thinking of all the things that you could do wrong. You've hit your window of your capacity, and your window of tolerance has just closed. Now you're in a dysregulated state. So something to consider about that psychological social phenomenon is that it is a physical phenomenon at the same time. You are physically increasing your heart rate and your breath rate, and the discomfort in your sensations. It'll show in your posture. Perhaps your shoulders are shrugged up by your ears. Maybe you're lifting up your chin a little bit to shorten the back of your neck. That is an evolutionary psychological protection that comes from a heightened stress response. We're trying to protect the internal organs by going into fetal position. We're trying to protect the back of the neck. A predator reaching for the neck, you want to shorten it to protect it, right? These things happen unconsciously. Now, when you exert yourself in exercise, you are challenging your physiological capacity to handle stress as you gradually increase it over time. What are you doing? You're increasing your physical capability to tolerate high levels of stress with your heart rate and your breath rate going up and the feelings of discomfort in your body. As you increase your tolerance for more and more stress by slowly improving it over time, so your body adapts rather than go too fast, you get overwhelmed. You're not going to adapt. It's not going to help you tolerate more physical stress, right? So slowly increasing your challenge over time, making sure you can properly recover. You can lower your heart rate and your breath rate between sets. These are things that will allow you to physically handle stress. And as a result, when you're in that situation again, where you're engaged socially with, one person, 3, 4, 5, a crowd, maybe being on stage, your body can handle more physical stress. As a result, your ability to get a sense of groundedness, like, okay, I've experienced stress in my body before, and I'm able to tolerate it when I'm exercising. So this experience of having a higher level of capacity to tolerate stress physiologically will translate to some degree to your social experience, to your psychological experience of stress. Okay, so all of that in mind, let's consider in both a social or psychological experience of stress and in an exercise context of stress, where you're doing, for example, interval training. What is your breath telling you about your exertion rate? If you're able to breathe deeply into your lungs, your chest, but also dropping your diaphragm, belly expanding your ribs, those lower ribs, that's a deep breath. That means that you're not holding so much tension, that you're able to fully expand your lungs. That tension of stress is not overwhelming yet. And so you can take in that deeper breath, get more oxygen. You're able to recover more effectively from the stress of your exercise if you're able to take in those deeper breaths. So while you're exerting yourself, chances are your heart rate and your breath rate are going to go up and your tension is going to go up. You're probably not going to be able to take breaths as deep as you exert yourself more and more. But when you start resting, here's where the tool comes in. To increase your capacity to recover and increase the bottom end of your stress window of tolerance, you're going to work on deepening your inhale so you get more oxygen. Okay. This helps the process of replenishing your energy stores. Okay. And meanwhile, your ATP is being supported not only by the oxygen that you're getting to your system, but also from creatine phosphate. That's why some people supplement creatine to help with their ability to exert. Okay. It increases the amount of ATP that's available because creatine phosphate adds a phosphate back to that adenosine triphosphate. Okay, that's a side note. You're increasing your ability to expand your lungs. So as you recover from an exercise stress, a set of jumping, as you recover, work on deepening that inhale. Now, if you did that and you weren't exerting yourself and you kept expanding your lungs really deep and you focused on expanding your inhales more, you would eventually hyperventilate because that's hyper, too much, ventilate, oxygen in your breath, getting more oxygen into your lungs, into your body. You would get too much because there's nowhere for it to go. You haven't exerted your muscles yet. So when you're exerting yourself, getting those deeper inhales, although inhales are stimulating, it's helping you recover your oxygen. Very important. Now, that being said, the tool here also includes working your best at lengthening your exhales. Now, if you do it too long to the point of discomfort, oh, I feel like I need to inhale. It's because your body needs oxygen. Okay, yes, you do need to inhale deeply and get more oxygen to your body. But as your heart rate goes down, you need to work on extending your exhales because that will affect the body by telling it on an unconscious level to lower the stress response, that lengthened exhale. So there is a specific tool that focuses both on deepening your inhale and lengthening your exhale. It's called the physiological sigh. And that's what I'm going to close out this episode with, is practicing the physiological sigh. So here is how the physiological sigh works. You can use this if you're experiencing social anxiety. You can use this when you're resting between exertions in exercise, like interval training. Okay. The physiological sigh goes like this, as best you can. Now, in exercise, you might have to use the mouth to breathe in. Don't worry about that. In a psychological situation, maybe you're able to use the nose. Great. It's better to use the inhale in this case so you don't hyperventilate. But if you have to use a mouth because you're needing oxygen quickly and you're exercising, you actually need that extra oxygen, great. Inhale with the mouth. But ideally, using the nose on the inhale, what I want you to do is notice 3 areas that you can expand your lungs. There are more ways of breaking it apart, but we're going to focus on 3. 1 is lifting your chest. 2 is letting your belly expand because your diaphragm's dropping and pushing down. So your belly gets big. You can actually practice this belly breath by laying on your back and putting a heavy book here. Practicing exerting your diaphragm, dropping it by getting that book to move. So the chest, the belly, those are 2 areas. The third is, as I mentioned earlier, expanding those lower ribs. So if you push in on your lower ribs, and then as you inhale, try and push your hands apart with your ribs. That widening of your ribs is that third area, and you'll get a lot more oxygen to your body if you're able to expand those lower ribs. So my suggestion is, since the chest and sometimes the belly, a little easier to get more oxygen in that way by expanding there, also focus here on that expansion of your ribs. So back to the physiological sigh is a double inhale. That is breathing in as deep as you can naturally. But at the top of that inhale, you're going to try and inhale even further. And chances are it's the expansion of the lower ribs that's going to expand more on that second inhale. So inhale, chest and belly, and then continue widening those ribs, that second inhale in a row, and then you lengthen your exhale by pursing your lips as long as you can comfortably exhale, which will improve as you practice. So let's do 10 of these. Ready? Deep breath in. And again, long exhale through the mouth. Calming the system as long as you can comfortably exhale. Number 2, inhale. Another inhale, long exhale through the mouth. Long as you can comfortably do it. If you need to start before I'm cueing you, go ahead and start again. Third inhale. And another inhale. Long exhale through the mouth. Long as you can comfortably do it. When you're ready to inhale, go ahead and inhale. At the top of that, another inhale. Long exhale through the mouth. And again, inhale deeply as you can. Another inhale. And long exhale through the mouth. As long as you can comfortably do that. You can also Relax, let go of tension on your exhales. Okay, number 6, deep inhale. Another inhale on top of that. Long exhale through the mouth. Relaxing tension as you continue to exhale. Long as you can comfortably do it. Number 7, breathe in. Deep as you can, another inhale. Long exhale through the mouth. Relaxing tension as you continue to exhale. 3 more, deep inhale. A little deeper, expand those lower ribs. Long exhale through the mouth. You might even hum. Exhaling with your nose. That vibration in the vocal cords can help you to further relax the body. Deep inhale. Another inhale. And long exhale. So we're using the nose, but we're resisting in the throat a little bit with a little humming. It's another way to further soothe and calm the body. That's 9. One more, deep inhale. Further inhale, second inhale. Long exhale. Long as you can comfortably do it, that vibration of the vocal cords, soothing and calming the body. By now, whether you've done 10 breaths with me, the double inhale, long exhale, or you've done more because it was a shorter time period for you, chances are you feel a little bit more relaxed than you were before. If you were exercising, it would help your heart rate and your breath rate to calm, lowering your blood pressure, lowering your overall stress load. And if you're doing this in a situation where you feel particularly stressed, perhaps in a social situation, you are lowering your heart rate and your blood pressure all the same. But you probably don't need to take in as much oxygen. So using the nose is a better bet as far as your inhales on that physiological side. Okay, so today has been officially week 11 for regulated habits. I call this compassionate warrior, the warrior archetype, digging down deep, finding that inner strength, but doing it in a compassionate way where we're making sure we keep nervous system regulation in mind. This has been about interval training, finding growth in the balance between struggle and rest, where we evaluated the window of tolerance, how much you can exert yourself, while also noticing how much you can calm your system, the rest between the exertion in sets of interval training, as well as when you're trying to calm yourself in psychologically stressful situations. I'm Mike Thomas. This has been Regulated Habits. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Cheers.